All right, welcome. Today we are so excited. We are here for a fireside chat with Andrew Duffy and myself, Rachael O'Meara. We're talking about leading with heart and how to build a vibrant culture using emotional intelligence. So we're going to do a little bit of intros and then we'll get right into it because we have a short and sweet 30 minutes. And welcome, welcome, welcome. Hi, Andrew. How are you doing today?
Great, Rachel. Thanks for putting this together and for just thinking about this concept of the fireside chats and talking about EQ and culture.
Yes, me too. Do you want to share a little bit about your background or how did you become a cultural architect?
It was from the style of work that you and I were doing together. So for the folks who are joining, Rachel and I met when I was a personal trainer and health coach in San Francisco. And she was a client of mine who was really athletic and looking to feel and perform better. And after working with folks like Rachel for a few years, I realized that the work style and work culture that folks like Rachel were in was really having an impact on how they were showing up to like the personal fitness and health coaching work we were doing. And I saw that as an opportunity to elevate the daily experience and performance of the people I was working with, both from like a fitness standpoint, but also like all around life. Like I did and still continue to do the personal fitness and health coaching work in service of people really feeling like they're living vibrant, exceptional lives. And culture in organizations has a huge impact on how that works. And so, Rachel, like, thank you for giving me the opportunity to realize that years ago, and then to explore that conversation now as you're doing wonderful work with EQ and I'm working in culture.
Yes, I know. And that's, yeah, the fun part is I don't have anyone else who I could ever claim I've had on a call or any training that's with my personal trainer. Although actually, well, not yet, not yet. There might be a couple more in the works, but yeah, you really got my butt in shape. So just like kudos to you. And now you're doing these incredible things as a culture architect. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachael O'Meara, and I'm an executive coach. I am also a partner at Six Ventures Studio, where I do CEO advisory and also just helping people rise to their next level of leadership using emotional intelligence. And part of my story is I worked in the tech world for 25 years. And about 12 years ago, I burned out. I burned out of Google, where I'd been a couple years already, and lived to tell. So I wrote a book called Pause about that because I didn't quit. I took a break. And instead of quitting, I chose to go back to myself to say, like, what can I do differently? And I learned a lot, needless to say. And so that really has spawned my whole new career here in executive coaching and emotional intelligence. It's really why I'm so passionate and on a mission for helping leaders really guide and curve their ways through what they could do differently, because I truly believe it's all learnable. Emotional intelligence, like culture, I'd say, is a skill where you create it, and we're all capable of it. And we don't have to burn out. We don't have to go through that pain, because we can really just be more, I think, emotionally connected to ourselves to know what we need to do differently. And that's what we can do different. So I'm just excited to be here today with you, Andrew, as we're going to get into it, because we're going to keep it short and sweet. So if you've got questions, feel free to put them into the chat. We're here on Zoom right now, and we will also be sharing the recording, I believe. So first of all, I think the first topic, Andrew, we're going to be talking about is culture and EQ, and kind of just setting the stage for that, right?
Yeah, and we can like use a story that you just shared about your burnout experience, which I think a lot of people resonate with so well, to to like to give more details on what EQ is and also like what it's not.
Right on. Yeah, so I agree, because it's such a buzzword and we hear about it all the time, EQ, EI. And just to define it for the common base here for all of us to know, the way I look at emotional intelligence is that it's knowing one's internal states, preferences, resources, and intuitions. That's a definition from Daniel Goleman. He wrote the book called Emotional Intelligence about 25 years ago, and really is very new as a science. It really wasn't available at all in the business world. It came from the economic world. And so it really brought light to, it's not just about what you know in your IQ, it's about EQ. And this is also different than social intelligence. I think social intelligence is part of that, really refers to someone's understanding within interpersonal relationships. So EQ is like more on the first biggest building block, is that awareness, internal awareness.
Okay, like you just brought up that distinction of how it really is inward facing and is not social intelligence, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And what I think something was shared from me recently with a colleague on just like a networking call, where he said culture is what happens when the boss isn't there. And I know I brought that up to you, and you're like, well, actually, that's not it. It's something else. Like, what did you want to share?
Yeah, I'm going to share in a moment, and I would love to prompt the folks participating to in the chat, just if you could define what you think culture is within an organization, like a nonprofit, a company, like whatever it is, a team, like what do you think culture is? And I'll use that as a launching point for like what culture is and what culture isn't. So everyone who's participating, to just share in the chat what you think culture is, like a quick one sentence definition. And just give them a couple moments, because it's a great question. And I used to think it was something different, a lot like what you just shared, which is it has to do with the spirit. And culture really, I think, is everything about an organization. So Stephen, you just said it's the standard upheld for how we treat one another inside the organization and out. That's great. So I very much agree that it is not just how people work within the organization, it's also how we work facing outward. And it's not just the treatment of each other, it's also everything that we do that has to do like how we choose to approach and organize things, and not just how we actively treat one another, but also how we choose to receive things. I think a lot of folks look at organizations and just look at the activities, but I think it also has to do with what we allow to come in and how we receive things. So culture, yes, it is what happens when the boss isn't there, and it is everything else and every behavioral expression of the organization. And like, I think organizations with real strong cultures choose values, and they choose a few values to work on, like the behaviors and actions that express those, because you can measure behaviors and actions just saying, hey, our value is this, or our culture is this. If you can't really measure it and start to have people act with, like, in accordance to that, then it's not really culture, it's just words, it's just ideas, right? So that's what culture is.
Yeah. And I also see in the chat, culture is like the flow of the river. I think that's really eloquently said there. And yeah, it is everything. So it's not just what happens when the leader's not in the room, it's what is and isn't expressed. I think that's so interesting and accurate. And I think culture also really helps either foster sustaining yourself at work, or it can also spit you out and you get burned out. What do you like? How do you create a culture where it is more sustainable for people at work?
So that's the $1 trillion question, Rachel. A lot of it has to do with the values I mentioned, and the organization actively participating in a selection of values that really represent the spirit of the organization. And over time, looking at how to express those values in those actions, and step by step, trying to do these really dramatic overhauls is similar to trying to lose a bunch of weight really, really fast, or trying to train for a marathon within 3 months. That itself will lead to burnout, and you'll have a lot of people.
I didn't try to do that yet,
but I don't recommend it. As a running coach as well, it usually takes a long time, because it has to. A lot of people will say that change is hard, and I think that hard change is hard. That change can actually be easy if you're trying to make easy changes, right? So when you're looking at shifting a culture or creating a culture in an organization, It's about the small steps. So it takes about a year, sometimes a little bit longer, to really create an organization founded on principles and seeing how those values express in everything from the email communications to what Stephen mentioned, which is like how we treat each other, to the sales conversations that are being had with prospective customers and also existing customers, and the branding even, right? There's so many facets of an organization in which the culture is expressed. So it does take a lot of time, and small steps create that sustainability so that we don't end up with burnout and resistance to the cultural shift, and including folks in that process, so including every employee, like through surveys, conversations. And I've just found that those approaches, slow, small steps, is what leads to long-term sustainability that, based on the values.
Yeah, I think that agreed. And I think the values, when you said that, you have to know your values, period. And I ask and think about that a lot because the companies sometimes have those, sometimes they don't, or maybe they did, but they don't like revisit them much. To me, that's what really stands out in what creates vibrant culture, kind of our theme today, and sustaining ourselves. So if you don't have the values, I think that's like step number 0 or 1, where those are clearly defined and everyone knows what they are at the company, and they're continually referenced or going back to, and things like that. Totally. So you mentioned folks who are being able to express their values at work and know what those are. So what happens when there are actions that don't express those values?
That's a great question. I think part of that depends on the culture of your organization. Does the culture support vulnerability and communication? Does it support growth, right? Has the organization chosen to be that? And that's how you start to create the conversations to deal with those kinds of things, and especially like leaders who are working with teams. And like Rachel, one of the things that you share with me is that you work with a lot of leaders, right?
I do.
And you mentioned that EQ is really important for leaders to have, and I very much agree that like leaders having good EQ helps them sustain a culture within an organization where they can have some of those conversations with their employees. So I think the question that you asked is really relevant to leadership and EQ within leadership, right? So I would like to reflect the question to you now, like how do you think EQ plays a role in an organization sustaining a culture that works long-term and is sustainable?
So yeah, this is great. I think it is about knowing how you feel. And a lot of times, and at least from where, my school studied back in the day before I started really studying emotional intelligence, this is the MBA, this is the whatever I learned in college and stuff. It's like, we don't learn about our feelings at all. And I was a geography major, so we definitely didn't talk about feelings there. And not in the business minor either, or the geology minor. But I think the key is to be that awareness, to know how you feel. And the thing is, if you don't know how you feel, it's really hard to know how other people feel, because all attuned and we can connect in that. We call that attunement. And emotions are everywhere. They're also the fastest things that our brains develop versus the intellect and the knowledgeable response. The great stat I like to quote is, our emotional brains are 400 times faster than our intellectual brains. So I think for corporate leaders, I think for folks who are aware of how they feel, you can do things differently based on that behavior. And I also think this is really related, by the way, to anything that's, I'm going a little off script here, to DEI. Diversion,
right.
equity, and inclusion is really all about our own emotional intelligence, because we all have biases, and that's part of the culture too, right? So I just wanted to highlight that, because I think it's important to say. But if we're able to shift our behavior, so I call a pause an intentional shift in behavior. It doesn't mean take like a long break like I did. It could be anything. It could be what you do today at lunch, not at your desk, because you're probably pausing there. So when we shift our behavior and get sustained, so we go outside, we go get the mail, we have a conversation with someone that feels engaging, that's how we get nourished and sustain ourselves. So one of my definitions of nourishment, and this is from where I studied emotional intelligence at the Wright Graduate University, is that it requires two things. This is a little bit of a teaching moment where it requires us to be present. So that's emotional intelligence. Right? You're present. So you know you're in the moment, meaning how am I feeling right now? If you don't know how you're feeling right now, then you're not present. You're either in your head thinking about the future or the past. Like we might all be doing that even right now. Right? So if we do that, that's important. And then anything that helps you learn and grow is also nourishment. And I think those two things, if culture can support those, you're hitting it out of the park, because I think a lot of times we forget that those are important because we're so busy doing all our things. So burnout happens when we're not feeling sustained and we're not getting nourished and we're not in touch with what's going on inside of us. That makes sense?
Yeah, it really does. One of the words that I like to use, or like perspectives, is the idea of service, right? So an organization is, yes, it's meant to serve a customer or like a community, and it's also meant to serve its employees, right? Like the people that work for the organization. And you can replace that word serve or service with nourishment, right? The organization nourishes and fills a need of a group or customer, and also the employees. If it doesn't nourish the employees, or the customer, those employees or customers are going to start to look elsewhere because their needs aren't getting met. So I really like that. I think I'm going to borrow that, Rachel.
Yeah, I use that in all of my coaching, all of my leadership development, because it's kind of not really known. We think of nourishment as like going to get, going out for a good meal. Like that can be nourishing, but are you present? Are you doing anything that helps you do things differently and growing? Well, probably not. So no wonder everyone's burning out. We're kind of spinning our wheels and we're not present to what's going on, or we're out of touch with how we can get nourished, because we're not aware. And I think values are a really big key indicator, by the way, of how you can get nourished, because if creativity is a value at a company, let's say, my guess is there's some probably really creative things you could do and get really nourished because you're enjoying them and you're growing as you do that. And I think the taboo topics, we talk about in culture is toxicity. And I think this is becoming more and more okay, like kind of skeleton out of the closet for how we address this. Can you share a little bit from your end about that? Like, what do we do with the culture if there is toxic people or people that aren't necessarily jiving with the cultural norms?
Sure. I would love to tie that into what Stephen just posted. Can I read what Stephen just shared in the chat?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I think they're very much related. So Stephen, thank you for sharing what you just did. So I'm gonna read it out loud. So Stephen wrote, I just attended a startup conference show yesterday where the founder described their journey as following their heart when passively investing rather than compromising their principles to achieve funding as fast as possible. This seems to be the opposite of the vibe in the startup world, where most mentors and accelerators want us to fundraise more than cultivate culture that's sustainable. So there's an overlap with that question about toxicity, because the idea, so toxicity a lot of times develops in the culture that Stephen mentioned at the end, which is like do, right? Or in this case, fundraise in the startup phase, than focus on the heart and the spirit, the values and principles behind an organization. Because doing for a culture of an organization is an expression of the values. If you are not doing something as an expression of the spirit and the values of the company, the doing oftentimes will be misguided or not in service of anything. It won't be nourishing something, right? So using that word and that concept that you shared of nourishment just a few moments ago, Rachel, and also that idea of serving, like our actions are meant to be in service or nourishing something. And if it's not clear what those actions are serving at the core, and it's just the do, which to me a lot of times is why people have this anxiety and this, some people call it a high vibration, but this like high stress level, without that connection to the values, which is really the why, that leads to toxicity, and it leads to burnout. And a lot toxicity, like explicitly defined, is when there is a component that acts very clearly against something else, or like poisons it, right? It's kind of like a poison. And if you have values, those provide very clear paths, right? And especially values, when intelligently chosen and selected, work together. And that when actions aren't working with values that are aligned, it's very easy for those actions to get toxic and poisonous to an organization. Does that make sense, Stephen, and everyone participating? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. That makes sense. I'm sure you and I could talk all day about toxic behavior. And I also know that that's one of the leading 6 factors of burnout is toxic tolerance in the workplace, whether it's the CEO or the layers at the very, end of the food chain. If it's tolerated, it is poison, and it spreads like quickly and can easily be starting to create more and more toxicity. So the key is to address it immediately and use it for things like performance management, or, ways of how to turn something around if that's possible.
Yeah.
So thanks for chiming in on that. Let's talk about our third topic, this topic about trust. I think our third topic is really about why trust matters so much, and how do we get more out of it? Like, how do we create more of it at work? And for me, trusting ourselves is important. So the key with trust is it starts with us. It starts with each of us to know I have a choice in the moment, right? That's why presence is so important. Moment by moment, I can choose to trust myself versus what the opposite of that is, which is usually fear, like usually feeling scarcity. And so if I'm able to be uncomfortable in the uncomfortableness and just know that, okay, I'm okay. Like, I'm okay right now. Like my brain might be thinking I'm under attack, or might be thinking I'm not doing well, but the reality is I don't know, but I know the evidence is I can choose to know I'm okay. Even if I get booted out today, I'm okay. I'm going to find a new job. I'm going to be fine, or whatever it is. Right. So to me, I think that that's really interesting, in knowing that we have to trust ourselves is first and foremost, which could be things like even a risky conversation, or addressing procrastination and being like, you know what, like, I'm just going to jump in, roll up my sleeves, and get this done. What do you think?
I love what you just shared about how trusting ourselves is really important. I think a lot of the conversations surrounding trust in the workplace are about like interpersonal relationships, right? Like with folks in our team, whether it's like just colleagues, leaders, whoever it is, like folks who are working for us, whoever it is, we usually talk about trust in that kind of capacity. So I really appreciate that perspective you shared on how significant self-trust is, and developing that as a foundation for being able to trust others as well. When looking at the culture within an organization, like, trust really is a foundational part that really allows the relationships to flourish. When relationships flourish in especially team-heavy workplace dynamics, the collaboration is so much smoother, and people don't get in each other's way. We get so much more done. And there's not just one type of trust, and saying like, I trust this person, I trust that person, I don't, right? Like, it's like there are different types of trust. There's trusting people based on a certain type of task or a certain degree of task, right? Like, I have friends that I can trust to pick me at the airport. I don't know if I have friends that I can trust to lend me money if I need it. I have family members I can trust to be there in, like if I get into a major accident, they'll be there for me at the hospital, but I can't trust that they'll remember my birthday, right? So there are different types of ways that we can trust people and that they can trust us. And understanding how to build a strong sense of trust. So like, if you have a scale from 1 to 10, like, how much you trust this person in this kind of task or capacity, right? So like, do you trust that they're going to respond to your communication relatively quickly? Do you trust that they're going to be professional with it? Do you trust that they're going to be open with you? So looking at the different ways that we can build trust, right? And like the scale of trust. So this, like the higher we have that trust level with people and the more tasks or kind of like capacities that we trust people, the more fluid we work, right? So like an example is sports teams that don't necessarily have the greatest talent, right? The most talented roster oftentimes will succeed because they trust each other and their communication is so open, they're honest with each other, and they're able to just make the sum of their work greater than the individual components, right? So like the trust is that keystone catalyst that allows for everyone to really flourish bigger than the sum of their parts.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, because we all have kind of seen that happen in sports teams, and it's about that openness that you can bring to the workplace, I think, and that builds functional teams and high performing teams. The other thing I would add to that is being honest and open, like, yeah, just like putting effort and dialogue to what is going well, what isn't going well as a team, having time spent a lot somewhere consistently along the lines of, maybe monthly, quarterly, or something like that, where you continue to improve, or it might be every week. High performing teams, what research has showed is that that's what part of their process is. And there's a person who actually specifically owns that. And like, that's their job, is to facilitate that and to get it done. And it could be anyone on your team. It doesn't have to be the leader, right? It could be pretty exciting to have that as a responsibility. All right. So thank you, Andrew, for sharing about trust. I think we got through all of our points we wanted to talk about today. Just recapping, what's your biggest takeaway, if you want to put that into the chat, right? So why culture and EQ are kind of related. That was our first point, and how they play a role that's really important. And culture, I think, is such an underestimated fact. I think I've told you this, Andrew, many times, where it's like, it's the last thing people think about, yet it's the thing that is the backbone of what and how people work it together and do it. I have a family member who just left a job because the culture wasn't good. They didn't feel they were seen or heard, and people were checked out. And they're like, well, why would I want to spend any more time here? And so they got another job. So I think it just speaks to more and more how important this is, and that it needs to continue to be in the dialogue, because it's what will keep people together and stick around at a company. The second key recap, where we can add to sustainability and nourishment, add a culture versus burning out, and how that can happen. And then we just talked about trust and why that is so important. And thank you for sharing some of these awesome different topics in the chat. There's another one here: toxic tolerance. This is the takeaway: can transcend the workplace and carry into your character. I'm leaving my current job because the culture is toxic and it has permeated into my startup habits. Very good point, right? So it's like, it doesn't just keep a boundary in one place. It can definitely do different things. So wrapping up here, I know we wanted to help people find us, get more information, things like that. Andrew, what would you like to share? How can we learn more, and what would work for everybody here?
Yeah, sure. So for Charu and Stephen, thank you so much for posting in the chat. Rachel, would you be able to shoot my email into the chat real quick?
Sure, I'll put that in there.
Okay, great. So Charu and Stephen, if you both have questions or specific pain points or topics that you would like to discuss on workplace culture, like I'm super passionate about it, and have been working in this space, again, coming from a place of assessment and like health coaching, to really look to elevate the daily experience of folks on an individual and group level. Like really supplementing what Rachael does. Like Rachael does such great work with EQ and helping folks really build that. So if you'd feel free to reach out to me, just start a conversation about what some of the things that you're dealing with are related to culture, and what had you interested in joining the conversation for today. And that will also help us create some of the future topics for this series, because Rachael and I are looking at making this a regular and recurring fireside chat. So, to adapt our conversations to what concerns you have is our goal, so that you guys feel like you're getting something of real value in these conversations.
Thank you, Andrew. Awesome. So I put your email in the chat, andrew@andrewkduffy.com. And for me, I am doing another training. It's going to be a little different, but it's next week. It's a totally free masterclass on December 12th. So that's at 12 noon Pacific time. And it's going to be on Zoom, just like this. 3 secrets impactful women leaders know that overwhelmed managers don't. So this one is for women, but I do these master classes every now and then. And I just had a lot of demand for learning these impactful ways to be, which include a vibrant culture, I would say. So feel free to sign up at pages.rachelomeara.com/masterclass, and you'll get all the information.
You see Chara's comment?
Yeah, I need that. Yay. Yeah, come on over, join us, send it to your colleagues as well. And we'd love to see you there. The more the merrier. And I go through a lot of different things there that I think are related to what we're talking about here. So with that, thank you all for joining us today. We're so grateful you came. And if you enjoyed this, let's talk more. Let's have you back, and looking forward to keeping in touch. So thanks everybody. And thanks Andrew for joining us today.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Bye.